going, AP Psych class? And welcome back for another Flex Time review. In today's lesson, we are going to be taking an in-depth look at the different forms of psychotherapies that clinical psychologists use in order to treat those suffering with mental illness. If you would like to get everything down on paper, there is a link to a worksheet in the description box. So, let's get started. When talking about the history of mental illness treatment in our last video, we briefly touched upon modern forms of therapy while talking about how each modern perspective views treating those with mental illnesses. In this video, we are going to take it a step further by going into a little more detail on these perspectives, as well as take a look at specific types of therapy used by each perspective. Then we will end the video by evaluating the effectiveness of treatment by looking at the efficacy of psychotherapy. The major perspectives that deal with forms of psychotherapy are going to be humanism, psychodynamic, behavioral, and cognitive. We're going to see that therapy is not only for those with a diagnosed mental disorder, but also for people looking for some extra help dealing with everyday stressors, such as relationship trouble or coping with tragic life events. While biomedical therapy is going to attempt to ease the symptoms of mental illness through the use of psychotropic medications, psychotherapy is going to be the treatment of emotional, behavioral, and interpersonal problems through the use of psychological techniques designed to encourage the understanding of problems and to modify troubling thoughts and feelings. While the ultimate goal of all forms of psychotherapy is going to be to produce a beneficial change in the way people think and feel, we are going to see that each perspective of psychology is going to take a different approach on how they treat individuals with mental illness. It is also important to note that some therapists take an eclectic approach to therapy where they evaluate their clients' problems and use techniques from various forms of therapy, not dedicating themselves to just one approach. In our lesson today, I am going to introduce you to 4 separate therapists, each one specializing in their own respective field. From there, we will learn about the different methods and techniques used in order to relieve the symptoms of mental health issues. So let's pack up and make our way over to our first office visit. Here we are in the office of Dr. Bill Freud, Sigmund's long-lost great-grandson, to learn about the psychodynamic approach of therapy. Now, you probably have heard me mention psychodynamic therapy and psychoanalysis therapy and are probably wondering what exactly the difference is. While traditional psychoanalysis is rarely practiced today due to its failure to produce valid scientific evidence through its technique, many of Freud's core thoughts have survived in what is known as psychodynamic therapy. During the times of Sigmund Freud, psychoanalysis sessions were very strenuous, having several meetings a week lasting up to several years. Obviously, this is going to put a huge strain on both patient and therapist. The psychodynamic approach runs on the same assumptions on how the mind works as the psychoanalytical perspective, focusing on childhood experiences and unconscious thoughts, but the major difference lies in the delivery of the therapy. Where in psychodynamic therapy, there are going to be brief weekly meetings that go on for about 15 weeks. In this modern form of therapy, the therapist and client are face-to-face rather than the traditional psychoanalytical approach where the patient would be positioned in a couch facing away from the therapist. The goal of psychodynamic therapy is for insight into the client's problems by analyzing past issues and unconscious influences. The therapist attempts to identify and make sense of psychologically damaging memories in order to gain insight on how to fix them. In an alternate form of psychodynamic therapy, we have interpersonal psychotherapy, which, like psychodynamic therapy, focuses on gaining insight through analyzing events of the past. But instead of focusing on how to undo these past hurts, they're going to focus on how improving current relationships can help mental health. So that is the gist of psychodynamic therapy. Now for our next office visit, we are going to head over to Dr. Rogers' office. Let's go. Welcome to the office of Dr. Carl Rogers, a very prominent humanistic psychologist who revolutionized humanistic therapy with his technique of client-centered therapy. Before we head in, just a reminder about the humanistic perspective of psychology. It is going to emphasize a person's potential for self-fulfillment. Unlike the psychoanalytical forms of therapy, humanistic therapy is going to focus on the present and future and explore conscious feelings as they occur. So let's head in. Here we are in the office of Carl Rogers, where he is currently demonstrating his technique known as client-centered therapy, where the therapist uses techniques such as active listening within a genuine, accepting, empathetic environment in order to facilitate a client's growth. The therapist is non-directive and shows empathetic understanding while the client runs the session. The goal of this form of therapy is for the client to develop self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-determination. Both humanistic and psychodynamic therapy methods involve the individual in therapy to gain understanding of how their feelings, beliefs, and actions influence their current mindset. Which is obviously good, but how do we improve upon these behaviors once we identify the issue? Our next two perspectives are going to be a little different, so let's head over to the next therapist office. We are currently in the office of prominent psychologist Mary Cover Jones, who is considered to be the first behavior therapist. A student of the founder of behavioral psychologist John Watson, Jones was inspired by his work, which led her to attempt to use the principles of classical conditioning as a therapeutic technique. Jones is currently with her client Peter. For whatever reason, Peter is deathly afraid of rabbits. Jones is going to attempt to use a technique known as counter-conditioning on Peter to see if she can eliminate a previously conditioned fear response. Counter-conditioning is based on classical conditioning, and it involves modifying behavior by conditioning a new response that is incompatible with a previously learned response. Let's observe Jones's procedure. You can see that she is bringing in a caged rabbit and keeping it just far enough away so it does not elicit our original conditioned response of fear. While the rabbit was at this tolerable distance, Peter munches on his favorite snack of milk and crackers. The point of this, Jones theorized that eating his favorite snack would elicit a positive response, one that is incompatible with the fear response. Every day for almost 2 months, Jones would repeat this procedure while inching the rabbit closer and closer with each passing session. Eventually, Peter was able to hold the rabbit in his lap and pet it with one hand while eating with the other. Jones was able to successfully counter-condition a fear response into a positive emotion. We also see generalization occur in counter-conditioning as Peter stopped fearing other furry things such as rats, cotton, and fur coats. Since Jones's counter-conditioning therapy, behavioral therapy has only grown, with several other techniques used by therapists today, including techniques based on classical conditioning, such as exposure therapy, systematic desensitization, and diversive conditioning, and also therapies based on operant conditioning, with the major one being a token economy. Next to our final office of cognitive therapist Albert Ellis. See you there. Remember, cognitive therapy is based on the assumption that psychological issues are due to maladaptive patterns of thinking. Therapists attempt to identify these errors in thinking and alter it to a more healthy form. So let's head in. According to Ellis, we largely feel the way we think. As a former psychoanalyst, Ellis became disappointed with the approach in helping individuals with mental disorders. As a result, he started to take more of an active directive role in his therapy sessions and ended up developing one of the first forms of cognitive therapy known as rational emotive behavior therapy, or more simply as REBT. The premise of REBT comes from Ellis stating, "People are not disturbed by things, but rather their view of things." The key premise of this form of therapy is that people's difficulties arise as a result of faulty expectations and maladaptive thought processes. This form of therapy attempts to change the patterns of irrational thinking that are believed to be the cause of the client's psychological problems by taking a 3-stepped approach. Referred to as the ABC model, an activating event first occurs. The individual's beliefs about the event then causes some type of emotional consequence. So there you have it, the ABCs. Activating events, beliefs, consequences. So let's take a look at how Ellis would use this form of therapy on a client. So here we have Billy, someone who has always done well in school and never has really had to worry about his grades. Last week, Billy received his physics midterm back, and to his disbelief, he barely passed. Billy now thinks of himself as a poor student, even though he aced all of his other exams. On top of that, he thinks there's no way he's getting into the college of his choice. And this has led him to lose all of his motivation to do any schoolwork. So Ellis is going to walk Billy through the ABCs. He will first identify the activating cause of the event, which would be the poor grade on his physics test. Next, Ellis would look for the belief resulting in this event, which would be that Billy thinks he is a bad student. Ellis would then identify the consequence of this belief, which would be the difficulty studying and the anxiety about not getting into college. Once Ellis makes Billy aware of these things, he can use several different therapeutic techniques, such as role-playing or modeling, in order to alter Billy's thought process. The idea is that once Billy is able to fix this maladaptive way of thinking, the behavior will correct itself. Another prominent individual in the field of cognitive therapy is going to be Aaron Beck, who developed his own form of cognitive therapy. Abbreviated as CT, the goal of Beck's therapy was to focus on changing the client's unrealistic and maladaptive beliefs. Now remember at the beginning of the lesson when I mentioned how some psychologists take an eclectic approach to treatment? The best example of this can be seen in a popular form of therapy known as CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is going to operate on the premise that thoughts, moods, and behaviors are all interrelated. Cognitive behavioral therapy will use both behavioral and cognitive techniques in assisting with a client. According to cognitive behavioral therapist Changes in thought patterns will affect both moods and behaviors, and changes in behaviors will affect thoughts and moods. Along with challenging these irrational thoughts, the therapist employs a variety of behavioral techniques, such as behavior modification, shaping, reinforcement, and modeling to improve unhealthy behavior patterns. So that does it for our little journey. I'll meet you guys back in the classroom. Welcome back. Now, before I let you go, I think it is important to talk about the effectiveness of psychotherapy. It seems that one of the biggest questions that crosses someone's mind when it comes to therapy is it even effective? In a future video, I will go over the efficacy of treatment in a little bit more detail, but for now, I would like you to look at this graph, which is going to be showing data gained from over 2,000 individuals receiving weekly psychotherapy and 500 individuals receiving no treatment at all. If you take a look at the graph, you can see that only after 8 weeks of psychotherapy sessions, more than 50% of the people involved saw rapid improvement, while only 4% of those not receiving treatment saw some type of improvement. While it does improve that some mental health issues can improve on their own over time, psychotherapy clearly accelerates not only the rate of improvement, but also the degree of improvement, as those who did not receive treatment were more likely to experience spontaneous remission than those who were receiving treatment. Alright, so that does it for our lesson on our forms of psychotherapy. I am 99% sure that went a little bit over my usual 5 to 10 minute mark, but I just really like to hear myself talk, so I apologize. If you did enjoy, please do feel free to like and subscribe. It is always appreciated, and it will keep you updated when I release more videos. Until next time, peace.